Legacy and the Queen, a First Chapter Friday read aloud video with the Word Nerd. Today, as you listen, play along. Watch for the story quote that will appear on screen. Write it down, word by word, and then follow the instructions given to you by your teacher. Stay all the way to the end to see if you've written it down correctly. Before we begin, I want to give a quick shout out to Mrs. Mullins' students at St. Clair Middle School in Port Huron, Michigan. I'm so happy you're here and hope you love this story. Happy listening!
Hi, my name is Amanda Zieba. Welcome to my channel, Learning with the Word Nerd, and another First Chapter Friday video. This week I'm going to be reading to you from Legacy and the Queen, and it is by two creators. And I say creators and not authors because it's kind of an interesting situation. So the creators of the book are Kobe Bryant, yes, that Kobe Bryant of the Los Angeles Lakers, and Annie Matthew. Now, I'm going to read you a little bit about each of them before we get into what the story's about, because I think this is just such a unique novel situation. Novel could, there's a pun in there on that. All right, so let's start with Kobe. Okay, Kobe Bryant is an Academy Award winner, a New York Times best-selling author, and the CEO of Granity Studios, a multimedia content creation company. He spends every day focused on creating stories that inspire the next generation of athletes to be the best versions of themselves. In a previous life, Kobe was a 5-time NBA champion, a 2-time NBA Finals MVP, NBA MVP, and 2-time Olympic gold medalist. He hopes to share what he's learned with young athletes all around the world. And as we probably know, sadly, Kobe passed away a few years ago in a tragic helicopter accident. But before he left us with basketball dreams, he also left us with a lot of great books. Annie Matthew is who he worked with on this book, and she is a novelist and poet. And in a former life, she was a professional athlete. She now lives in Iowa with her gray furry dog named Gus. So how this story worked is that Kobe had the ideas. He's like, I want to write this story about these kids who are athletes, but also who have like magical powers. And there's lots of them. This one's all about tennis. There's another one all about basketball. I'll make sure to link all the series down below for you. But it's just like a mashup of two things, sports and magic. Creator, Kobe came up with all the ideas, and then writer, Annie, told those story ideas in a way that we could all follow. Um, it's brilliant. I love it. It's a fantastic story. Let me tell you what this one specifically is about. Tennis means everything in the Republic of Nova. Too poor to afford formal training, 12-year-old Legacy practices, serves, and returns against the wall of her father's orphanage to pass the time. But all of that is about to change. Silla, the queen, announces her annual tournament where citizens battle her fate for her favor and cash prize. A cash prize big enough to save Legacy's family orphanage, and Legacy has her heart on winning both. In Nova, tennis can unlock inner magic. With the orphanage at stake, Legacy will need to channel hers to rise above the competition and shine. And shine this book does. First of all, in addition to being a fantastic story, it's also just, it is a gorgeous book. I don't know if you can tell in the video, but it's like fuzzy. This is like a felt cover. The pages have all of these very detailed illustrations, and it's like thick, high quality, beautiful paper, color. This book is just, it is high class all the way. And it's an excellent story. So let's dig into that. Chapter 1, The Light of the Moon. On the morning of her 12th birthday, Legacy Petrin woke from a dream about playing tennis with a winged racket. She was smiling when she blinked awake. For a few moments, she let herself focus on the tawny lines of the stain on the ceiling. The web shape had been spreading for years, the result of water damage from a storm that had raged through the countryside before she could remember. Now the stain was almost comforting, like the unfolding of a map of a secret magical city. Only once her eyes reached the edge of her secret city did the uncomfortable thoughts start flooding her mind. She remembered how funding for the orphanage had been cut. She remembered the new white strands in her father's close-cropped hair and how his hands had trembled when he lit the lamps after dinner last night. By the time Legacy sat up in bed, her worries had formed a knot in her throat. When she swung her legs over the edge of the mattress, the tumbled stones of the floor pressed their cold fists into her arches. Shivering, she reached under the bed and pulled out her racket. The wood frame was warped, and the old strings were fraying. The bark grip was now nearly black, imprinted with the shape of her palm, but Legacy loved that racket more than any other object she'd ever possessed. Holding it, she felt like herself. A new sense of calm spread through her body. When she stood across the room carrying her racket and a balding tennis ball, the stones underfoot were no longer so cold. Trying not to make any noise, she passed the long rows of beds where the littles were sleeping. She paused only to kiss Ink on the forehead. In sleep, Ink's face was angelic, soft, brown, dimpled, and surrounded by a halo of sun-kissed curls. With both her little hands, she was clutching her beloved blanket. It was the same blanket she'd been fearfully gripping when, not even a year ago, Legacy found her abandoned on the stone steps of the orphanage. Back then, Ink had been too frightened to talk. She'd been too frightened to sleep. Now Ink was braver. Legacy had taught her to wear her blanket as a cape, and whenever she did, she became a new little girl, bossy and bold, capable of ordering the older littles to take parts they didn't want to in the elaborate plays that she directed. Smiling to herself, Legacy moved on toward the door. She only paused again before the last bed where Van, Legacy's best friend and the only kid at the orphanage who was her age, was still sleeping as well. His head was always hot when he slept. There was a light sheen of sweat on his forehead. His skin was the color of wet cypress bark. The colossal book he'd been reading, Elander's Novica, a history and scientific and otherwise of the Republic of Nova, was splayed over his skinny chest. His mouth was open, and a silver thread of drool was trailing out of the corner of his mouth and down his chin. He'd forgotten to take off his glasses, and they rested crookedly over the bridge of his nose. Legacy smiled. While he was sleeping, at least, his face was peaceful. He hadn't yet picked up the daily delivery of the Nova Times. His eyes hadn't yet darkened in indignation, and he hadn't yet begun to rant about the historical reasons for poverty in the providences or the lingering effects of the Great Fire, despite all the High Council's Silla's reforms. For now, he was only occupied with his dreams. And that was how it should be, Legacy thought as she slipped down the back stairs and out through the kitchen. She sat down on the stone steps that led to the garden and laced up her sneakers. Outside it was still dark, surrounded on one side by dusky olive trees of the agricultural valley and on the other side by the slope leading up to the forest of Cora. The garden seemed to sit in a big bowl of silence. Only occasionally was that silence broken by a faint boom from deep in the mines, somewhere beyond the agricultural district, Agrico. The vibrations spread through the earth and crept up through Legacy's sneakers, stirring memories of the articles Van liked to read over breakfast about dangerous mining conditions and pollution in the provinces. For a moment, the knot formed again in Legacy's throat, but as soon as she was hitting the ball against the stone wall of the garden, the last of her worries slipped away. She was alone. Not even the birds were awake. There were no chores to be done, no little faces to wash, no small socks to wrestle onto wriggling feet. For now, all Legacy had to do was play tennis. She started with ground strokes. The morning was cool, but while she moved, her body grew warmer. The only steady sound was the plonk of the tennis ball bouncing on stone and the ping of the ball striking her strings. In the darkness, Legacy could barely make out the balls that bounced off the rough stones of the wall, spewing off in unpredictable trajectories, as though she were playing an extraordinary, skillful opponent. Sometimes the ball got lost in a shadow, and she had to search in the weeds choking the garden, or in the roots of the cypress trees. But once she'd settled into her rhythm, her eyes began to adjust. The pale light of the moon began to seem brighter. Legacy found that she could make out every crack and divot in the rough stone of the wall. She could anticipate the ball's angle. She moved into her shots, taking them faster and faster, swinging harder over the top of the ball so that the sound it made when it struck her strings was cleaner. Then she began to aim for the same stone in the wall. Then she forced herself to aim for the same divot in the same stone. Time and time again she hit her mark. She poured her whole weight into each shot, certainly spread through every muscle in her body. When she finished that drill, she moved up the wall, practicing volleys. Between shots, she felt a smile creeping over her face. She was so lucky, she thought. Even if they were down a goat since the day before yesterday when the new kid wandered into the forest. Even if now they barely had enough milk for the littles. even if she'd been hungry for days. Even so, she had her racket. She had the wall to play against in the mornings. Maybe she wasn't as good as Gia, the top tennis player in Nova, who attacked her ground strokes with long honey blonde braids swinging behind her and those thick stripes of black paint under her eyes. In Van's copy of the Nova Times, Legacy had read all the stories about how Gia's grana was growing stronger every day, about how she could make the sky turn dark over her opponents, how she could cause shadows to lengthen so that it was difficult for her opponents to keep the ball. But that didn't matter to Legacy now. All that mattered was the feel of the ball striking her strings and the certainty in her own body. Or at least that's what she was thinking when the sound of something stumbling around in the garden startled her and caused her to lose track of the ball. "How are you doing that?" Van called out through the darkness. Legacy breathed a sigh of relief. For a moment she'd allowed herself to imagine one of those monsters from the Korra stories, a giant crackle maybe, or a lurl with ice blue eyes and sickle-shaped fangs. "Seriously, Bud," Van was saying. He must have finished taking care of the goats. Now he was moving toward her, feeling his way through the darkness until he tripped over a root, caught himself, ran a hand over his hair, and then propped himself casually against the trunk of a cypress tree. Legacy focused on the strings of her racket, acting as if she hadn't seen his near miss. He was always so self-conscious about his clumsiness, Legacy thought. Then she tried to swallow the little surge of guilt that had crawled up from her stomach. "Where was that light coming from?" Van said. "What light?" Legacy asked. "The light you're using to see the ball." Legacy looked around and then shrugged. "The sun's rising," she said. Though now that she'd stopped playing, it did seem a little darker than it had before. "I can't see a thing," Van said, "and you're getting every shot. It must be some kind of grana." "Or it's getting light out," Legacy said. "I'm telling you, Bud," Van said, "you have all the grana you need. All you need now is a better racket and a little serious training, which is why this is such incredible news." Now he was waving his copy of the Nova Times over his head. His glasses had grown crooked again. No matter how many times Legacy tried to fix him, they never quite balanced on the bridge of his nose. "What are you talking about?" Legacy said, peering at the newspaper. "I'm talking about change," Van said. "I'm talking about progress." "What are you actually talking about?" Legacy said, rolling her eyes. "The Queen," Van said, "has announced that she's holding a free trial for children from all the provinces." Legacy peered over his shoulder. High Consul Silla, otherwise known as the Queen, since her younger days on the tennis court when she dominated her opponents so thoroughly she seemed to wear an invisible crown on her head, must have announced a new provincial outreach program. "Winner gets a free ride to the academy," Van said, "and a slot in the qualifiers for the national championship." For a moment, Legacy's heart seemed to have sprouted wings. Now they were flapping wildly against the cage of her chest. How many nights had she gone to sleep dreaming of training at Silla's academy? How many times had she closed her eyes and seen herself playing in the national championships? She'd even imagined winning them, beating Gia, the best player in the Republic, and kneeling to pledge her loyalty to High Council Silla, who would stand before her with that regal composure that was the source of her nickname and that made her so beloved by the people of Nova. Legacy had dreamed of that moment while teaching the littles to read. She dreamed of it while preparing their bottles. Hanging their wet pajamas up on the line in the garden, she'd closed her eyes and heard the applause of all the citizens who had come to watch her play in the finals. She'd felt the grass of the academy courts giving under her feet. She'd imagined herself changing the weather like the other top players, like Billy Sal, who could cause snow to swirl down on his opponents, or Sandra Dominku, who could make the ground of the court start to shudder and crack. Legacy had imagined beating them all. But now, hearing Van say it out loud, Legacy shook her head as if to clear out all the fantasies. It was one thing to have daydreams while washing the little's pajamas, but it was another thing entirely to let herself believe that they were real. And that's where we're going to stop for today. If you want to continue reading Legacy and the Queen, pick up a copy from your school library, purchase it from your favorite local indie bookstore, or as always, you can grab it via the Amazon link down below in the video description box. Thank you so much for joining me for this First Chapter Friday video. I hope you will come back again for more First Chapter Fridays, brain breaks, direct instruction videos, all the great things that I have to offer for you on my channel, Learning with the Word Nerd. I'll see you again next time. Happy reading.
To continue reading Legacy and the Queen, or to check out any of the other books in this series, pick up a copy from your school library, purchase one from your favorite local indie bookstore, or grab it via the link in the video description box. This week's mystery quote says, "How can you tell her she wasn't meant for this? How can you tell her to be someone she isn't?" Don't forget before you go to check out the rest of the First Chapter Friday playlist. I've got more than 200 middle grade and young adult novels waiting for you to learn about and listen to. Thanks so much for visiting my channel, Learning with the Word Nerd. I hope you come back again for more First Chapter Fridays, brain break, direct teaching instruction videos, and more. I'll see you again next time.